Well, when you start examining other temples around the world, you realize that these other temples have a lot in common. That is, they're all very, very difficult to explain with vine ropes, copper tools, no pulley, and so on. One Egyptologist, the director of the Giza Plateau, said, "There is not one grain of evidence of any advanced civilization ever having been in Egypt prior to the Egyptians." And I thought that was one of the most accurate statements I ever heard from an archaeologist. Because if you're looking for grains of evidence of sand, you will miss it. If you got your head in the sand, you will miss it. But if you look up from the sand and stop looking for grains of evidence, you will see millions of tons of rocks right in front of your eyes, giving you some pretty damn good evidence. The Grand Pyramid of Giza is made of 2,300,000 stones. 2,300,000 stones. It stands at 481 feet of altitude. Its base is 13 square acres. That is extremely large. When you take survey picture, satellite picture of the apex of the Grand Pyramid at Giza, it is 1/4 of an inch off the center of the base. That's 13 square acres. 13 acres square. 1/4 of an inch off center. That's after placing 2,300,000 stones that you have cut with copper tools. Yeah, you need some pretty good moonshine to do that one. Well, I guarantee you that is extremely difficult to reproduce. In fact, there is no way engineering companies on this planet could ever reproduce that. Even with all of our modern technology, if we give them billions and billions of dollars, they couldn't come up with anything like that. Because if you divide 1/4 of an inch error by 2,300,000 stones, the accuracy at which you're placing these stones is outrageous. And we can't do anything like that. Our most accurate buildings, like telescopes, are not that accurate. They're not even close to having that kind of accuracy. Go ahead.
So you could say we've just barely come out of the Dark Ages.
Basically, or we got into the Dark Ages. Because it seems that there was people that were doing a heck of a lot better than us. So when I was looking at this, I'm like, wait a minute. That doesn't happen that way. Why is it that we think, that this is taught as facts to children in schools every day? That the pyramids were built by people pulling on vine ropes? And you know why? Because in the 1800s, a bunch of English archaeologists showed up in Egypt, and that's the only thing they could come up with. And because they had PhDs and they were very respected archaeologists, since then, everybody is repeating the same thing. And somehow, a theory that's completely unproven became a fact. In fact, you will not get a PhD in archaeology if you say anything else about the pyramids. I guarantee you that. You cannot get a PhD in archaeology by saying the pyramids were built by Little Green Man. This is one of the problems with education. a whole bunch of people repeating what they've all been taught doesn't advance the field very rapidly. Because everybody is repeating the same thing, you're not going anywhere. So, but these archaeologists never actually, I know they're not mathematicians, but this is simple mathematics, okay? You take the number of stone, they tell you that the pyramids had to be built in 20 years, okay? So that the dynastic Egypt worked. And then you calculate how fast they had to put the stones in. At 7 days a week, 10 hours a day, 365 days a year, for 20 years, they had to place the stone every 2 minutes to finish the pyramid on time. With that level of accuracy. Never mind. But then the archaeologists say, no, those were farmers. They could only build the pyramids during the time of the flood of the Nile when they couldn't work in the fields. 3 months out of the year. See, when they had that 3 months vacation, hey, let's all go and build a huge pyramid. So they went out there and built pyramids 3 months out of the year. You redo your calculation. Now they have to place a rock every 2 seconds to make it in 20 years. So that really doesn't work. Because it's not like you can take these huge rocks, an average 2 tons, some of them up to 40 tons rock. Like in the King's Chamber, there's 100 slab of 40-ton pink granite rock. Okay? These things at 135 feet of elevation in the pyramid. It's not like you go, hey Joe, catch this one. Hey Joe, catch this one. And the other guy on the other end is like putting them in. You can't do that. And it doesn't matter if you got 100,000 people. You still can't do it. And they tell you they did that by rolling the rocks on logs. Well, they might have not noticed, but these pyramids are in the middle of a desert. You need a lot of logs to move 2,300,000 stone. Where did the wood come from? When you ask them that, they say, oh, they imported it from Europe. I see. Was this like some catalog, 1-800 ordering? Because, as far as I know, the Egyptian didn't, easily navigated into Europe, cut millions of logs they would have needed, and brought them back. There's no evidence of that. So, but even more fundamental, I'll ask you, even more fundamental. The fundamental axioms of archaeology is that you observe and decode the remains of a civilization to understand its morses and its activities and all this, right? Okay. There is over 1 million hieroglyph walls in Egypt. Thousands and thousands of hieroglyph walls in Egypt. In the temples, in the tombs, everywhere. They tell us how they made love. They tell us how they eat. They tell us how they went to the washroom. They tell us everything about their life. Everything. Not one of those walls mentioned building the pyramids. What? They forgot? You're talking about something that would have taken a huge effort. You'd think they would have put at least a little wall somewhere saying, oh, by the way, we built the pyramids. Oh, by the way, we built the pyramids. No. None of that. In fact, the archaeologists say not only that the pyramids built, that the Egyptians built the pyramids, but they say that they built them as tombs. Okay. What's the evidence? Zero. Zilch. Not one pyramid was ever found to host a mummy. Not one mummy was ever found in a pyramid. Not one. And I'm not just talking about Egypt. I'm talking about all around the world. And it's funny because you know how they do all these like historic, History Channel and all this stuff. They have all these nice documentaries. And they show you where they found the pyramids and the tombs and all this, and Tutankhamun and all this. And then they splice and they cut directly into the pyramids. So you think the mummies were found in the pyramids. But in fact, the mummies were found, most of the king's mummies, were found in the King's Valley, far from the pyramid. Some of the pyramids, they had to dynamite their way into the pyramid. They couldn't find an entrance. When they got inside the pyramid, there was the sarcophagus, the so-called sarcophagus in the middle. It had a slab. Some of them had slabs that were like 40 tons slabs sealing the sarcophagus. They would unseal it, pull the slab off, still no mummy. What was their conclusions? Grave robbers. Those grave robbers, they were unbelievable. They just walked through the walls because they had to dynamite their way in. So those grave robbers got there before. They must have walked through the walls, got in there, picked up the 40-ton slab on top of the sarcophagus, pulled all the stuff out, including all the bones and everything else, which, wonder what they would do with, and then, closed it back up, resealed it, just to make sure they didn't disturb anything, and then walked back out with all of this stuff. This doesn't make sense. Now, there's other things that don't make sense. There is nowhere on these pyramids that it says, I built this for my tomb. I was born then and I died then. You think if you build such a great monument, at least you put your name on it. There's no hieroglyphs inside the pyramid. And Lord knows that the Egyptians put hieroglyphs everywhere. So why didn't they not write inside the pyramids? So those are all huge contradiction to the concept that the Egyptians or the Mayans or the Incas or the Chinese or so on built their pyramids. That's all logical. Pyramids were not tombs. Pyramids were not built by Egyptians. No Egyptian text talks about the Egyptian building the pyramids. The text do talk about monuments, enormous monuments being built. And who they say built them was the sun god. The Mayans, the Incas, the Chinese, the Japanese, all cultures that have these buildings, none of them say we built it. All of them say the sun gods taught us how to build, how to talk, how to write, how to do all this stuff. This is an ancient symbol that was found on a granite pillar in Abydos, Egypt, in a temple called the Osirian Temple. Why is it that this object, this drawing, which is on the 100-ton pink pillar in the middle of that temple is not in any picture books or history books anywhere or archaeological books anywhere. It took me 10 years of research to go through all the books that were written on the Azarian temple, from the first papers that were published from the archaeologists that found the temple to eventually, all the papers and the books that were written. None of them had this picture in it. The way I got this picture is that a friend of mine went out there and took it. Okay? Why is it that this picture is not in there? I'll tell you why. Because this graphic is not carved into the rock. It's not etched into the rock. This graphic is actually burnt, laser burnt, into the atomic structure of that pillar. Now, when you think of ancient civilization 5,000 years ago, you don't expect them to be doing laser burn on, hard surfaces at high levels of accuracy. Okay? Archaeologists have a really hard time explaining these things. When they can explain something, usually the tendency is not to popularize it. So they leave it out. Some of these symbols that are in the Azarian temple, there's no writing in all of that temple. Not one piece of writing. All there is these things. There's a few of them. Some of them are chipped. Well, the laser burn is through the rock. So that actually, even if you chip it, it still appears on the rock. We have no current technology to reproduce this. That's why you don't find this in history books. The other thing is that the Azarian temple is 50 feet below all the other temples at Abydos. The archaeologists tried to say, the Egyptians dug 50 feet and then started building. Well, the Egyptians never did that to any other building. And actually, when the geologists went there, they went, no, that's not the case. The building was there, and sedimentation piled up beside it. Well, when they calculate how long it would take to get 50 feet of sedimentation, that temple is no longer 4,000 to 5,000 years old. That temple is 9,000 to 12,000 years old. Maybe 10,000 years old. That's why archaeologists really don't like that temple. In fact, they very rarely discuss it. The Sphinx. Most people think that the Sphinx is built. The Sphinx is not built. The Sphinx was carved. The Sphinx was carved right out of the enclosure of the Giza Plateau. Now, when you look at the paws of the Sphinx, you might notice that there's like brick-like structures on it, so it looks like it's built. Those are repairs that were done later in history. But the Sphinx was carved, and actually there's evidence that the head of the Sphinx was recarved. It used to be a lion's head, but it was recarved into a pharaoh's head by one of the pharaohs. However, there is erosion patterns on the Sphinx that is a telltale sign that the Sphinx had to be carved when there was a lot of rain hitting it because of the erosion on it. We know when the last time this area had a lot of rain. a lot of rain. And that was approximately 10,000 years ago, which matches the Osirian temple at Abydos. These blocks here consist of the Sphinx temple. They're the blocks that were removed from the side of the Sphinx to carve the Sphinx out. Now, if you were removing blocks from the Sphinx enclosure to build a temple in front with the blocks, would you use a 100-pound block, 500-pound block, maybe even a 1,000-pound block? Even like 3 or 4 pound blocks. That would start becoming a problem with our current technology, especially in the sand. And especially if you got to stack them. Okay? But the ancient Egyptian or whoever 10,000 years ago built this didn't remove 100-pound block. They removed 200 tons block. And we know that they were removed from the enclosure because the stratification of the layers of rock matches where they were removed from, and you can actually tell which rock came from exactly where in the enclosure. 200 tons. See, this is a little person here. See what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not trivial. You don't just grab a 200-ton block with your buddies and move it over there. The current we actually at this time lift about 200 ton with the largest land crane on earth. And we move it only from a truck bed into a boat. We can't roll with it. We can't go and move it around the sand, and certainly we can't stack them on top of each other to make a temple. 10,000 years ago, somebody was moving 200-ton block with ease. I think this is fantastic. You know, because this is about our true history. This is about what happened on this planet prior to our current history, prior to our current thinking. Look at this statue. Ramses II. When they found this statue, it was laying like this. It had fallen over in the desert. It's made out of pink granite. It's perfectly polished with copper tools. And this is a person beside it. The statue itself, when they found it, they said, "Oh, let's just move it over there because we're going to build the Ramses Museum." So the engineers came and they said, "Well, okay, but then we'll have to cut it in pieces because this thing is approximately 1,000-ton solid block of granite. 1,000 ton. That is 5 times more than what we can lift today with a land crane. So instead they built a museum around it. It was much easier. This is not the only 1,000-ton block that was found. The pillars on each side of the entrance of temples in Egypt, they are called obelisks. Many of them were in excess of 1,000 tons. And they all come out, all these large objects come out of a quarry that we know where it is. It's hundreds of miles up the Nile. And the quarry is on the other side of the Nile over a mountain range. Okay? When you ask archaeologists, how did this get there? They say, they cut a trench from the Nile across the mountain range into the quarry. And then they let the water in, and then they picked up the object, they stuck it on a barge, and they floated it down the Nile. But there's no evidence of that trench ever being cut. How do you lift up a 1,000-ton object and put it on a barge without sinking it? I mean, that is just not appropriate. It just doesn't happen. So when you look at this, you start to wonder, who were these sun gods? And were they able to go all around the world? Under the water in Japan, recently, pyramids were found. These pyramids are at 19.47 latitude. They're enormous pyramids. All the fishermen knew that they were there, but they didn't think it was important, so they didn't tell anybody. And here is another picture of these slabs. They're huge. They're huge blocks. What's really interesting about those is that, you see, you can't date a pyramid. You can't date a monument. Because carbon dating only carbon dates. You need carbon. Rock doesn't have much carbon in it. Not enough to date it. It has silica, and it has, a certain rate of decay and all this. You can date how old is the rock, but that won't tell you when it was cut and assembled into a pyramid. Okay? So actually, archaeologists don't date the monuments. They just find the bones of this poor fellow beside it, or they find a fireplace beside it or something, and then they carbon date that. And they say, oh, it's this dude that built this thing. You see? But when the pyramid goes under the water, now coral growth starts to happen shortly after. And that's carbon datable. So now you can tell at least when the pyramid went under the water. Well, when they carbon dated these pyramids, they went under the water at least 10,000 years ago. The meltdown of the last ice age. When the water rose and covered the earth. There is over 500 flood stories in ancient civilization all around the world, talking about an advanced civilization that was there prior the sun gods and the flooding that occurred that destroyed morals of that civilization. Here we might be seeing some of the vestiges of that civilization. But anyway, these pyramids were found in Egypt. These ones are datable to 10,000 years. Check out this picture. This was taken during the Second World War by an American pilot that was lost over China. And he saw this pyramid, and he took a picture, and he brought it back home. He survived the whole thing and brought the picture back home. And everybody, a few years ago when I would present that, people would say, oh, well, that one is iffy, This could be a this could be a hoax. Well, okay, nobody believed him, except that the Chinese government in the last few years have released these pictures. There's hundreds of pyramids in China. And the Chinese government actually got the farmers to farm on top of the pyramids so that they wouldn't be so apparent by satellite. And the reason why, so here's the poor farmer that got the job. The reason why they were doing that is because they didn't want the Western world to know about these pyramids. Why? Because the legends that comes with these pyramids is that the sun gods built them, and that the sun gods were blue-eyed, blonde-haired people. As far as the Chinese government looked at this, blonde-haired, blue-eyed people had to be Europeans. And the last thing they wanted was European people being responsible for some of the most ancient knowledge of the Chinese tradition. So they didn't want those pyramids to be known by the West. They did find the mummies of these blonde-haired, blue-eyed people in the high desert of China. Over 500 mummies were found. All very tall, absolutely not Asian people. And then you go to the forbidden city of China. The city that holds all the knowledge of the universe. All the knowledge of the sun gods. And at the entrance of the city is the Sphinx, the lion, which in both Egypt and Chinese tradition are the guardian of the knowledge. They guard the knowledge under their paws. And when you look closely at the paw, what do you find? A spherical intersecting pattern of the flower of life, which generates 64 tetrahedron grid. Guardian of the knowledge. Fairly old, but this section of China was largely rebuilt and fairly recent, But it's all coming from very ancient tradition that's passed on orally throughout the ages. That's why you find still the knowledge being present. Although the knowledge of the sun gods has been very, very confused and diluted throughout the ages. So, do we have evidence of the sun gods? We do. These are skulls that are found in temples in South America. This is in the Peruvian Museum. I call it Conehead. When the archaeologists found this, they said, "Oh, this is the result of skull deformation." You know how the ancient tradition, they would bend their head to deform them? Now, they did do that. This is the bust of Nefertiti, for instance. Tutankhamun did have a deformed head. There's many skulls like that. But when you read the ancient texts and they say, they talk about deforming their head, they say that they did that to imitate the sun god, to become sun gods themselves. Now, if you deform your head, right, today, it doesn't matter how much you deform it. you will never be able to exceed the volume capacity of your skull. Your head might look really weird, but the volume inside will be exactly the same. In these cases, the volume of these skulls, the inside volume of these skulls, are over twice the natural volume of the human skull. The normal volume of the human skull. These are not the result of skull deformation. You cannot do that by deforming your skull. The other thing that's interesting is that the hole at the bottom of the skull here, where the atlas goes in, the spine, tells you how big the person was, right? Because you can figure it out from the size of the spine. These people had to be between 12 and 15 feet tall. There was giants on the earth. Many ancient texts talks about the sun gods as being giants. These are very, very big people. And the fact that there's multiple of these skulls found in temples all around South America tells you that it's not the result of some deformation. These skulls were found in South America and Mexico. Here is some of the Mexican skulls. The early ones were South American skulls. This one actually has a larger volume than the cone head. And this one is the largest volume ever found. Mexico. And the facial features are missing, but the skull is intact, and it's enormous. That's the eye sockets, so you can imagine how large that forehead was. And here is each lobe, each hemisphere of the skull, of the brain, seeming to have developed independently in this case, and making it enormous. Go ahead.
On the prior slide, am I correct in saying that the orbits of the eyes are a good deal larger than normal?
Oh yeah, much larger than normal. This person had huge eyes. And there's all sorts of features on these skulls that are not normal. For instance, in these cases, many of the facial features in the jaws don't belong to an Homo sapien. They're mixed between various species that are not supposed to be mixed together. Here's Tutankhamun. Even Tutankhamun seemed to have a larger than expected skull. Here's his brother as well. Now, there's many instances in the Egyptian and the Mayan and the Inca scripts where they describe that the sun gods, including in the Bible, where they describe that the sun gods actually mixed and had children with women of the human species. And that generated a whole new species, which was half sun gods, half man. So here, these might be evidence of this altered species, of this mix. And you would expect that these people would become pharaohs, because they would have all sorts of capacity that the average man didn't. So here, we're starting to see a whole new picture of the history of human beings. And mingled in that picture is the information that these sun gods tried to give to man.
انت بين احضاني، انت بدنيا جميلة، انت بعالم ثاني، عالم كله محبة لو انت بحناني، انسى العالم كله انت بين احضاني. واسرح في عالم احساسي، وانسى همومك وافرح يا كل اهلي وناسي. ما عدنا اللي يجرح، لا ظالم لا قاسي، انت عيوني وروحي وقلبي وذاكرتي وجداني، انسى العالم كله. في محرابي انت صديق احساسي، انت كل احبابي، انت حبيب عيوني يا زهرة شباب، انت عيوني وروحي وقلبي وذاكرتي وجداني، انسى العالم كله. بين احضاني، انت بدنيا جميلة، انت بعالم ثاني، عالم كله محبة لو انت بحناني، انسى العالم